Alright, good evening everybody. This is Andy Johnson, back with you on the Deluxe Reverb build. We have our boards mounted, over here, our bias supply board, our main board that has about 90% of the components on it, as well as our cat board for the power supply is on the back here. Sorry, there we go. Still getting used to these weird camera angles I got going on here. Alright, so this is when this part of the build takes a lot of concentration. You need to, like following a road map, the wiring diagram comes in handy. And of course, you know, we include the schematic with it, so that helps a lot, because again, I keep reiterating as I go through these builds, there's a certain level you need to be at to really comprehend and understand what's going on inside these amps. You don't need to know everything. You don't need to know exactly how the phase inverter works and the first and second gain stages, where all that stuff. What you need to know is things that ladder across all amps, especially Blackfaces, because it's not only the components that you use in a Blackface, and I think I said this before, it's also how you wire the board, the amp itself, because there's a lot of errors that can happen, that you'll wind up with a weird tremolo tick, or your reverb will be on when it's off because you have two wires close to each other. Your power supply will be doing some weird things on you. Blackfaces are probably the most fickle amps that you can build because of the reverb and the tremolo circuits. When they're working right, they're absolute ninth and 10th wonders of the world as far as I'm concerned. They're fantastic. There's no pedal that can replicate this whatsoever. That's why Fender of course came out with a reverb unit for the late in the production of the Tweed amp, so that you could use with that, which was absolutely fantastic. We still sell those as kits, a lot of them as a matter of fact, for recording, and that tube driven spring reverb that these have, the Blackface have, as well, the 6015. There's not a pedal really that can replicate that. Sure, there's the Holy Grail reverb that's fantastic. I can't say anything bad about that. Strymon has some good ones. Of course EH, like I was saying, the Holy Grail. There's a lot of good reverb pedals out there that these amps will take really good. But if you go back to the foundation of what those pedals were, they are this. They were modeled after these amps. As well as the tremolo pedals that Boss had come up with. Of course, there's other hundreds, of other tremolo pedals out there on the market that are replicated from this. So if we do this right, this it's a pedal-friendly amp. But if you do it right, you won't need that, and you'll see as you start to play this that this is an amp that has a lot of different personalities. Pushing overdrive, clean finger style, even use acoustic with this. I've even seen in the studio, I won't name the bands, but there's been heavy metal guys that have recorded with this that'll put a metal zone in front of it, and then run this out, not to the combo cab, but to run it out to a 2x12 or 4x12, and it's like unbelievable. It's just crazy. You would never think that, especially a super reverb. That's another one that it's just crazy. You wouldn't think of it fitting into that genre of music, but it does really well. So yeah, we're going to start wiring. The one thing I want to say, and I've said this before, I said this with the Deluxe, I did it with the board, I've done it with all the boards. You start at one particular direction. Again, from my left, this is just my personal preference. I like to work from the left of the amp itself all the way over. And then start at the top, and I'll generally do it reverse on the top of this. I'll start at the right and actually work my way over back to the left. Okay. Now, the one thing I do want to do before I start actually wiring up the board itself is to take care of the transformer secondaries, of course primaries as well, on both the output and power transformer. And I'm going to wait on a reverb driver because this will mesh really well into the wiring for the preamps on here. So, our choke as well, which is actually included in with the output primaries right here. These two black are a choke, 6v6 choke that the AB760 or AA and AB763 used. Actually, I think all the reverb amps use that. Of course, they use a 6L6 choke for the larger ones, but yeah, I want to go ahead and get this wiring out of the way. That way it's already in place, and I can mesh everything into it, because again, you're going to have wires laying over on top of other wires. Some are good, some are bad. You'll see when I start to build this that it'll be very regimented in the way that you do it, because again, you want to look towards the future. If you open this thing up, or your kid opens this thing up, or you sell it to a friend and they start having problems with it, when they open it up, it'll be as easy as looking at a New York road map. I shouldn't say that. Well, God, it won't be that bad. It'll look like your average hometown road map, let me say that. So you'll be able to analyze things very rapidly with these boards, and with all the Blackface itself. But yeah, okay, Deluxe Reverb. I'm going to start wiring it right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with our transformer leads here, which again is all the way to the left of the actual chassis itself down here. And I'm going to move my way over. Okay, so I'm going to pause the video now. I'm going to do the bottom half, which is our high voltage half, or most of the high voltage half. Most of the voltage feeds plate, voltages and a lot of the higher voltages on this side of the chassis, the tube socket side, whereas a lot of the top is a signal. Okay, so hang in there. Now we'll be back shortly. Alright, hey everybody, I'm back real quick. I just wanted to show you something. If you notice, we twist the wires for a lot of this stuff, and I explained this why we do this in the 5E3. But I just wanted to show you real quick a little cheat that we use in manufacturing. Okay, so to twist these up, a lot of people do them by hand, and that's perfectly fine. But we notice to get a tighter twist on these, what I do is I like to trim these equal. I'll hold these straight out of the transformer and make sure the leads are equal, and then I'll use an actual drill, believe this or not. I'll put a drill, this will go right in the chuck, and there we go. This is twisted. Now, the way to secure that we do in manufacturing as well, is we heat it slightly with a heat gun. And this is one of these tips from builders they don't want to tell you, because this is how they make things look so good. Now, when you reheat the PVC insulator on these and it cools down, it retains that shape, so it will not untwist on you. And I'll show you here. I'll cool it down with my hand. I'm going to pull it out, and there you go. There's a twisted pair. And I'll do this again with a rectifier filament. Make sure they're even. Make sure they're, see I'm pulling it straight out of the transformer. I'm grabbing it with a finger and I'm holding it there. Put it in the drill chuck, and I'll pull it out and twist again. And there we have twist, and I'll heat it again. It's very slow. You don't want too much heat, because you'll melt the insulator on all sides. All right. I'm going to cool it again. I'm going to cool it down with my hand. All right. I'll take it out. There you go. That's how you get the really tight, consistent looking winds for your transformer. So, I know a lot of people, some people say, you're not supposed to do that, it's mechanical thing. Well, you know what, it gives results. I mean, look at this. It's hard to maintain that kind of consistency with your hand. You can, but it's just so much easier using things like that. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to start on the transformer, and I'll be back shortly. Actually, I'm going to show you, as soon as I get the transformer wired up, what's going on here. I'll come back over real brief and show you the actual transformer wiring, and I'll wait on the actual board wiring, so we'll get the transformers wired up here, okay? Alright, hang in there, and I'll be right back. Okay, we are back. I've got my power and output transformer wired in here. Well, other than the secondary is the output transformer, but we have our primaries of our output transformer wired in here. Our B plus goes, of course, up here to the main board. And the power transformer is wired. This is a whole bunch of wiring coming off of this. Now, when you do the socket wiring on these, what I like to do is I like to give it what's called a service length. And the reason that it's a little bit longer than it needs to be, I cut the high voltage a little bit short, but it's fine. The reason I do that is because from what I've seen, either kit builds or just older amps coming into the shop, if a a rectifier or a octal, a 6V6, 6L6 or EL34 is notorious for it. If they nuke themselves, what will happen is it arcs across the actual socket itself. You'll get this carbon trace here, and there's no way around it. You should just go ahead and replace the socket. Unless the amp is extremely valuable or the customer has sentimental value, they don't want anything taken out, don't unsolder and resolder. Snip them off at the sockets themselves, re-strip the wire, and replace the socket, and so you'll have fresh leads going into the socket pins themselves. Reason why is because, again, you don't know, the person that might have put that together might have been using a lead-free solder or some kind of weird, I don't know, we've even seen pipe solder on some of these things. So when you go to resolder, it just turns into a mess. You have to heat it up to such a high temperature that it might melt the socket or melt the insulation on the wire. Just cut the wire off, right at the tube socket, which would be right here. Install a new tube socket and just give yourself a little bit of length to solder back in. And if you have service length to these leads, you're perfectly fine doing that. Totally fine doing that. It's actually recommended that you do that. So I took the liberty. I went ahead and put the bias supply onto the bias supply board, and I wired in part of the bias supply to the bias pot here. For the filaments, the green that we have here going to the pilot light, some people like to run the filaments down to the first octal, the first 6v6 on the Deluxe Reverb. That's totally fine if you don't do that, but keep in mind that when you do that, and believe it or not, I've seen some original Fenders that had that. What happens is that you have the leads from the transformer going to the octal socket, then you have the leads coming off the octal socket going to the pilot light, and on the same octal socket you'll have leads coming off of that going to the second octal socket all the way down. So what that does is it creates more wiring that you don't need and more solder joints. So if you have your filament wiring going directly to your pilot light, it comes off the pilot light, which is only two pair, or excuse me, it's 2 wires per side, to your first octal, which is another pair per side, all the way down. You don't run into that weird, the 3 wires going into one socket. You don't want to do that. And in this case, it doesn't add any extra wiring doing that. Now in a Super Reverb and Twin Reverb, you'll notice that if you go to the pilot light, it's a shorter wiring. So anytime you can reduce the amount of wire in one of these kits is a plus, but you still want to be able to service it. Okay, just keep that in mind. Again, when you're building it, you don't want to come straight across right over to the top of the real tight to the tube sockets themselves. You don't want to do that. And another thing, this transformer has what we call export leads at Mojo, and what that is basically not only can this transformer work on 120 volts, it can also work on 100 volts, which is Japan, 230, which is parts of Europe, or excuse me, 220 parts of Europe, and I believe parts of Scandinavia, 230, which is through Europe, parts of the UK and Scandinavia and Russia, and then 240, which is everybody else. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but so that's what these 4 wires are. And there's a good reason. If you notice, I didn't do this in 1 heat shrink. I did it in 2 pair, and the reason is that I ran out of large heat shrink. So what I did was I did 1 pair here and 1 pair here, and I tuck it down out of the way. And again, you want to make sure you have enough length, because people in Europe and overseas and Asia and Scandinavia and all these foreign countries, they're wanting these amps. They want them, and a selling point is if you were to start building these things for a living and put them up on eBay or wherever you want to sell your own private site, the first thing that somebody's going to ask you is that, can you wire that for 240 volts? Well, yeah, you can, and then bam, it's a sale. You sell it automatically. Now on the wiring diagram, if you notice here, we have two black wires which are right here coming off the transformer. Now this wiring diagram, keep in mind this is probably 4 or 5 years old, and we're going to be updating this very soon, but the whole pandemic kind of threw us off our game a little bit for timing for getting this stuff done. But you'll notice that there's two black wires coming out of the transformer, and that's how the original Deluxe Reverbs were, the non-export ones. They had two black primaries. It did not matter which one went to fuse and which one went to the actual switch. So that leads us to, we have a bunch of customers that will say, okay, there's a black and white on the transformer. Okay, so the black and white on the transformer means that the black is the start of the primary coil and the white is the coil for 120 volts. And they'll say, you know, does it matter that white goes to white over here on the actual power switch here and that black goes to black? And truth is, no, it doesn't matter. The only white and black that matters in this amp is that you have your black, which is your line, and that's a nasty solder joint, I gotta fix that. Your line voltage, load voltage, or live 120 volts, black goes to your fuse, and that your white goes to your switch. You can have your black from the transformer going to switch, you can have, you know, the white going to, it doesn't matter. Why? Because, you know, with a primary coil, you're only dealing with a coil wire that has a start and a finish, and when you're feeding the rest of the transformer, in layman's means, it doesn't, you don't have to worry about that. But again, the black and white from the power cord does that. Now, to keep things consistent, what I did here is I went ahead and put the black on the fuse and the white, so it'll match when we get our cord in there. Okay, so and another way to look at this too, again, and I pointed it out on our wiring diagram, the vintage ones had two black. So to kind of remove that question even being an issue, I tell customers sometimes, okay, what if these wires were two black? And then they go down this rabbit hole and say, well, I need to figure out what the start and finish go. No, you don't. You don't need to figure that out. Do you think they sat there on the line at Fender and you know, used multimeters and voltage into the actual amp to figure out which one was, you know, the start and the finish of the coil? No, it didn't matter whatsoever. So these wires could actually be two black and it doesn't matter. But again, what matters is your AC voltage coming in, the white and the black, and of course you want your green grounded here. Now, again, on the power transformer we have a center tapped high voltage secondary, which is this right here. This goes to ground in Blackface amps. What that does is, for push-pull amps like this one is, it splits the high voltage coil into two different parts, or I guess you would say phases, that actually go through the actual rectifier. You have an upper phase, lower phase, or, you know, it's a full wave rectifier. So that's why this center tap is here, with some other things, but we won't go into that. Another thing here is, if you notice, there's a blue wire coming off here that has a red stripe, and this was common among Fenders and Marshall. Well, the color coding wasn't, but what this is called your bias supply from the transformer. And what this does is, if this feeds 60 volts or 50 volts or 35 volts or whatever is necessary for the bias of the actual amp, I believe in this one it's actually 55 or 60 volts, this feeds your bias supply, which is up here. So I went ahead and did that. Okay. Now, this transformer, like Deluxe Reverbs, AA and AB763s, did not have a filament center tap. So they used these two 100 ohm resistors right here on the pot light going to ground. Okay? And what this does is it creates a ground reference for any 60 cycle hum, or a fake center tap if you want to call that, for the actual 6.3 winding. That this is the winding that draws the most current. I believe in this one it draws close to 4 amps. So you want to eliminate any kind of noise you got going on in your filament line, and this is how you do it. And another reason I like to run these wires directly to the pot light is that if you run it straight to the socket, then back up to the power light, well, guess what? You just added about 10 to 12 inches of wiring that hum can induce itself along the chassis as it's going across. So the shorter you keep these wires, the better off and the quieter you'll be. Alright? Now, also went ahead and I wired in our choke. Our choke is 2 black wires. It is not polarized. It does not matter where. Let me get rid of this here. It does not matter which wire goes on the actual wiring diagram to the solder pads. One is for B+, and another one, supplies. It goes between the actual B+ supply and your first stage filtering into your filter cap board. Okay. Now, I didn't do the output transformer secondaries, which are here, the black and white, which is 8 ohm. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mesh this into the wiring as I go across, because of course we have wiring that's going to come across for a B+ and screens and things like that. But I did go ahead and while I was up here, of course I went ahead and soldered in one of our bi supply wires here. And I also grounded our bi supply here. Okay. What has that got? Oh, that's right. I was thinking there was a resistor went across that, but it's not. Deluxe Reverbs don't have the resistor. So now, what's unique about the bi supplies? If you look at this, it doesn't look right because you're feeding voltage backwards. You think positive. You got the voltage coming through here, and it's positive, and the positive is facing the wrong way, and this is going to explode. Well, no. In bi supplies, you're supplying a negative voltage, so everything, not everything, but the caps are generally reverse, the filter caps, because the positive will see ground as reference, and that's exactly what I've done here. I have a ground. This runs short as possible right to our terminal strip here that's grounded with our high voltage center tap on this terminal strip right here, 3-low terminal strip. One other thing I want to note is that I see this all the time, and I'm not sure why people get stumped up on this, but they'll use this entire strip as grounding, and that's totally fine. That's why we have them here, and Fender used them as well. But they'll attach, they'll come off of, say, one of our cathodes here, and we want it grounded over here, and we're going to attach it to here, and we leave it, and then we come in and ground here. And all of a sudden they turn the amp on, and there's a bunch of noise, and they can't figure out why. Well, look at these terminal strips here and here, and this one's really good. I'll show you if you can see this, but the center lug, solder lug on these is the only lug that's grounded. So if you're going to use the outer 2 lugs, you need to run a ground from the center to the outer one, just a bus wire across to make sure all 3 are grounded, and that's a very common problem. So that's one of the things you want to look out for. Alright, so this concludes this video of our transformer wiring, and our next video we're actually going to start the beehive, the nest of wiring, spider wiring we have here going on, and try to make sense of all this going on. Okay? Thank you guys so much again for tuning into Mojo videos. We hope everybody out there is safe. We're getting back up to full staff though, so we're trying to get our custom cabinets and our OEMs up to speed. But what's most important is that everybody at home is staying safe, stay corona free, and just stay healthy, okay? And hopefully you're not going crazy and you're actually building, not necessarily this kit, but you're building an amp, you're moving forward because you want to figure this out, okay? Thank you guys so much again, and I will be back and we'll start this rat's nest. Thanks much.